welcome to part 2 of the Mama You're Not Broken audiobook, written and read by me, Anna Cusack. Last episode was the introduction, and today we're diving into the first chapter, which is about guilt. Mum guilt is really intertwined with modern motherhood, and so having a strong foundation about how, when, and why it operates is really key to be able to access the other 9 unspoken emotions of modern motherhood we'll be going over in this book. Before we start this chapter, I just want to remind you that you can order a physical copy of this book and also see a full reference list at www.annacusack.com.au/book. You can also head to that website to jump into my membership for either $35 Australian dollars a month standard price or $25 if you're experiencing financial pressure or identify as someone from a marginalised group. The membership is a subscription which gives you access to a monthly group workshop or online circle, 2 days of private voice message mentoring per month with me, and also includes an active allyship contribution to pay the people behind the diverse voices you'll be hearing from in season 3 of the podcast for their time and expertise. There are no lock-in contracts and you can sub in and out at any time. If you're not up for the whole membership deal but want to support the podcast and its guests, you can become a patron of the podcast for $5 a month. Okay, let's get started. Chapter 1. Guilt. If there's one emotion that is common to every modern mother, it would have to be guilt. Guilt is so common that you might think it's just a biologically ingrained part of being a parent, but it is largely a modern curse. I've even spoken to a woman who felt guilty about not feeling guilty enough and was worried this meant she wasn't caring or loving enough. Thankfully, this is not the case, but we'll get to that later. Let's cut to the chase and name parent guilt for what it is: mum guilt. Recently, I asked every mother I knew if they got mum guilt. The responses were a resounding yes. When I asked my husband if he ever got dad guilt, he tilted his head to the side and said, "What's that?" His response had already answered my question. You know, like if you went to the park and forgot to take a hat and sunscreen and she got sunburnt, would you think that meant you were a bad dad? I asked. After what felt like an outrageously long pause, the answer came back. I'd be annoyed at myself for a minute or two, but then I'd just make a mental note that I had to remember to pack them next time. What would be the point of getting worked up about something that I can't fix? Touché, husband, touché. How different is this response to the self-talk of the mum I'd met that day, who had indeed forgotten her son's hat and sunscreen for their trip to the park. "I'm useless at this packing business," she said. "I always forget something or other. I swear there is something wrong with my brain since having a baby. Come on, honey, let's play in the shade. You're already getting pink. I can't have you getting sunburnt. Then I'd feel like an even worse mum than I am already." A sample size of 1 isn't a very insightful study, so I asked 10 of my mum friends in heterosexual relationships to run it by their partners and get back to me. After completing their mission, my mum and detectives reported male responses ranging from "I don't understand what you mean" to "I've never thought about it." It seems my husband wasn't the only man who had so little experience with the parent-specific guilt that all the mothers in my circle felt so strongly. Theodore Roosevelt once said that comparison is the thief of joy. Often, but not always, mum guilt crops up when we compare ourselves to another mum. There are plenty of people at mothers' groups, school pickup, the shops, or celebrities we can compare ourselves to, but the first point of comparison we usually have as a mother is with our own mother. Some mums say that they could never fully understand or appreciate just what their mothers did for them as children until they had their own babies. Others are hurting from fractious relationships where their needs were not met in childhood and may continue to be unfulfilled in adulthood too. Whether your mother is the hero you grew up wanting to be or the one person you aspire to never, ever be like, your children will generally find a way to push all the right buttons to ensure that you fail at that endeavour. In the case of "the mum is my hero" model, you may do everything she did and feel that you can never quite do as good a job. It might surprise you to find that you don't actually enjoy staying home with your kids as much as she did, and then feel guilty about wanting to go back to work. You may recall her as being eternally patient, then beat yourself up when you reach your limit and lose it at your kids. The reverse is also true. If you feel your mother was ineffective in some way, perhaps inconsistent with her affection, distant, cold, or absent altogether, It can induce great guilt when you crave time and space to yourself. If she was controlling or even aggressive, despite doing everything in your power to express the opposite characteristics, it is likely that your children will push all your buttons until you act just as she did. One of her phrases will spill from your mouth, seemingly out of the blue, and bring with it a tidal wave of guilt. Indeed, perhaps these words or ways of being are an imprint from your mum's mother, or her mother's, like some kind of generational hangover. When it's spelled out like this, you can see why the concept of hurt inflicted by, or in comparing yourself to, your own mother is sometimes referred to as the mother wound. As transformational mentor Bridget Wood says, whether you have your own mother on a pedestal or down in a pit, you're in a cage. The early years of motherhood certainly provide us with an opportunity to review the humanness of our mothers and to unlock ourselves from that cage so we can step into the role of mother in our own right. To recognize our mother's strengths and weaknesses is not asking to either disrespect or make peace with them, but to recognize that we are free to take or leave their methods and ways of being, that we have permission to pick our own paths without having to ask for it first. Guilt related to our intergenerational relationships can have great bearing on how we operate as women with children in the world. It is when we start to integrate the micro-level, personal stuff we carry with the macro-level, broader social context we live within that it starts to get really interesting. Soon after my daughter turned 1, I stumbled across the work of Motherhood Studies sociologist Dr. Sophie Brock. It blew my mind to learn that there were researchers who deemed motherhood a topic worthy of the world of academia, rather than relegating it to the realm of mumfluencer blogs. I signed up for her next program almost on the spot and continued to have my mind blown for every lesson of the whole 10-week course. In her work with mothers, Dr. Brock asks her clients to bring to mind the person they imagine to be the perfect mum. If you feel able to do so, I'd love for you to shut your eyes and do the same now, visualizing her in as much detail as possible. She may be someone you know, a celebrity, or a combination of people. What does she look like? Where does she live? Is she in a relationship? How many kids does she have? How does she interact with her family? How does she spend her time and who with? Does she work? If you're in Australia, the UK, the USA, or other Western parts of the world, chances are most readers are coming up with similar responses. Your imagined perfect mother is likely to be fair-skinned, fit-looking, not too young or too old, and well-groomed. She probably lives in a middle or upper-class area with her male partner who is the main breadwinner. She probably has 2 or 3 children who are neither too close nor too far apart in age, and seems happy, patient, and generally fulfilled by her life as a mum. Your imaginary ideal mother probably spends much of her time in the service of her family, for example, engaging her kids in enriching activities and play, driving them to sports, and attending school assemblies. She may work some of the time, but she is primarily in charge of ensuring that her children's needs are met and that they have a neat and tidy home to enjoy. She is also likely to be able-bodied, neurotypical, and without any underlying illnesses or mental health challenges. The same goes for her and her partner. She is likely to be on good terms with her parents, in-laws, and other relations, ensuring that her children get the maximum love and stimulation, without overstimulation, possible. She is able to achieve balance with all her tasks as a mother, worker, and housewife, as she prioritises her health by engaging in proper self-care and keeps her husband sexually satisfied by maintaining a raging libido. How do you measure up? I can tell you that despite ticking many of these boxes, I fall painfully short. The truth is, I can't think of any one mother I know who meets these criteria. Still, she is the one that fills storybooks, appears on our screens, sells us dream homes and new cars and teeth whitening gel from the chemist. Is it any wonder we feel inadequate, not enough, or even worthless? Our imaginary model of pleasant, level-headed, cookie-cutter motherly martyrdom is what Dr. Brock describes as the perfect mother myth, and she is just that, a myth. Calling this imaginary ideal standard out is a huge step in getting free of mum guilt, but it doesn't go the whole way to dissolving it completely. We have literally spent our whole lives learning what it means to be a good mother, and unlearning it doesn't happen with the flick of a switch. Children are like sponges. We have been soaking up information about how a good mother should look, dress, act, and think from our families since the day we were born. As we grow up, we are drip-fed more information about what it means to be a good mother, from portrayals of women and mothers in our school books, advertising, news coverage, TV shows, magazines, and social media. I'm sure I'm not the only one to look at glowing, flat-abbed, freshly washed-haired celebrities cuddling their sleeping babies a couple of months after birth and feeling compelled to retreat further inside my baby vomit-stained hoodie. The Instagram version of motherhood can be especially insidious, as our phones have essentially become an extension of us. The temptation to numb out by scrolling is massive, yet we might be unwittingly taking on more of the successful motherhood is perfection messaging that leaves us feeling even more inferior than before. The flip side of this is the storyline that mothering is so hard, which can help us feel solidarity with other mums, yet also traps us mentally into the idea that a supremely difficult life is the only alternative to the imaginary perfect one. Talk about lose-lose. As tempting as it is at times to put our blinkers on and ignore everything and everyone, we do sometimes have to interact with the big wide world. The perfect mother myth remains embedded in our current cultural fabric because it suits the people in power, who are generally white, rich, straight men. Knowingly or unknowingly, the organizations, institutions, and businesses they control collectively reinforce the ideal mother stereotype, which encourages women to keep trying harder to be more like a fictional Wonder Woman and less like themselves. This leaves mothers so busy and tired it becomes near impossible for them to push back against the very circumstances and social structures making them feel downtrodden in the first place. Remember that line in the film The Usual Suspects about the devil tricking the world into believing he never existed in the first place? When it comes to the perfect mother myth, the great trick of the patriarchy is that we have internalized what it means to be a good mum so deeply that we have started to police ourselves and modify the way we mother our kids to fit with the ideal mold. Considering the fact that for thousands of years, being ostracized from your tribe or village meant being literally thrown to the wolves, it makes sense to conform. Many of us are unintentionally adapting what we say and do in the raising of our kids to keep our offspring and ourselves safe. Essentially, we either feel guilty for being not good enough or feel uncomfortable because we are suppressing what we want in order to fit in. Meanwhile, dads are not held to a strict two-dimensional model of what perfect fatherhood looks like, so unless something major crops up, they can largely skim over this painful part of parenting. Dads, for example, are unlikely to get the guilt about the kids having peanut butter sandwiches for dinner again, that their child's book week costume was slapped together at the last minute, or feel compelled to do canteen duty on their day off. Well played, patriarchy. Well played. We're not destined to feel like guilt-ridden basket cases forever, though. Dr. Brock asserts that the way out of our pickle is firstly by recognizing the mythical perfect mother, and secondly, the ways that she infiltrates our thoughts. When we understand and notice her, we can start to call her out and stop behaving in the ways that suit the establishment rather than us. This might look like recognizing and rejecting thoughts like, I should exercise more, or I should be more routine with our activities. These examples have implications to them we might not be aware of, namely, if I was thinner, I'd be a better mum, and unless I keep a routine, I'm a bad mother. When we can see the deeper layers and assess them against what is important to us, we can start to use our guilt as a force for good. Good, I hear you say? How can this be? Whenever we notice guilt tapping us on the shoulder, it is a cue to figure out if the thoughts we have and actions we are taking in mothering our kids are truly in line with our values. We can then decide if it feels right to continue along the same path or take a different course of action altogether. When my baby was little, she wanted body contact, specifically mine, to get to sleep. I didn't mind that part at all. Breastfeeding class told me that the sleepy hormones in my milk and sucking action would help her nod off. What I didn't like was the next part of it. It felt like if I even had the thought of placing her sleeping body into a cot, she would wake crying. I should get her used to the cot, was my thought. A little below the surface were the implications of what it meant to be a good mum. Good mums use nap time to keep the house clean. Good mums don't bed share with their babies. Good mums put their babies down, drowsy but awake. I tried placing her in the cot in the prescribed drowsy but awake fashion and tried, supposedly no cry, pick up and put down methods. No deal, Mama. I transferred my sleeping baby to the cot with every white noise, swaddle suit, rocking technique, and transferring trick in the book. No way, Jose. I took the side off the cot and lashed it to our big bed in the hope that being in arm's reach would help, or that I would at least master the feed to sleep then roll away maneuver. Good joke, Mum. When I found myself spending hours of my day in a darkened bedroom, contorted half in, half out of the cot trying to get her to sleep, I realized just how crazy my situation was. Who was I trying to impress? My friend's 60-something-year-old dad who told me that I was making a rod for my own back? My husband, who generally doesn't care about the state of the house and is quite capable of tidying up if he feels it needs it? I'm not sure exactly who I was trying to please, but it certainly was not impressing my baby. Her crying made her feelings about sleeping solo abundantly clear, and that heart-wrenching noise made me feel even more inadequate. Pacing the hallway at 3 a.m. with a screaming baby, my guilt had finally gotten the better of me and gave me the reality check I needed. I stopped to assess the situation and realized I wasn't a failure for not enforcing independence on my dependent by design baby. She wasn't crying to make this harder for me, but was doing exactly what a baby does, using all her evolutionary survival smarts to tell me she needed me physically present with her to feel safe enough from predators to sleep. When I was finally able to step outside of my own guilt to see what she really needed, I gave myself permission to meet her where she was at, not where society told me she should be. I bought a good quality symmetrical baby carrier that didn't kill my shoulders so I could wear her for day naps. I learnt that an appropriate amount of newborn sleep can range from 11 to 19 hours per 24-hour period, and came to realize that my baby just didn't need as much day sleep as some other babies did. I researched how I could make bed sharing as safe as possible and was surprised to learn that when certain criteria are met, breastfed babies sleeping in with mum are no less safe than those sleeping in a cot. It was mum guilt and, if I'm being honest, exhaustion that saw me reassess what was going on for us and find a path that was in line with my mothering values. Now that you know guilt is coming, you'll be better placed to spot it, understand why it's cropping up, diffuse some of its power, and maybe even use it as a tool for good in your life. Before we wrap this up, I want to note that not every situation you feel guilty or shameful about in your mothering is one you can just change your mind about, alter your methods, quietly brush your hands off, and stroll on. If your baby cries when you drop them at daycare, but you need to work to pay the bills, handing in your resignation notice and saying, "Guilt told me to quit," is probably not a viable option. Rather than giving you more things to do to band-aid over your feelings, why don't you try mindfulness, deep breathing, therapy? It might be more useful to look at the situation you feel bad about from different angles. Who owns that voice in your head, the one that tells you you're a bad mum for going to work? Can you thank that inner voice for being with you to this point, but let them know you're not inviting them on the next stage of your mothering journey? If your child has a father or second parent on the scene, have they ever been asked about how they manage the juggle of parenthood and paid work? Can you see that mothers have been set up to feel responsible for our kids' emotional, physical, and financial security in a way that dads largely have not? Can you see how this sets our sons up to feel less capable or nurturing than our daughters when they become parents, and how rejecting the perfect mother stereotype benefits all our children? If you perceive your actions or decisions as a mother to be negative or unsatisfactory, can you see that there are also benefits to how your situation is playing out? Rather than just thinking positive, can you list as many short-term and long-term benefits and opportunities that arise for both you and your child in relation to what is happening right now? Go grab yourself a notepad or journal and start your list. If we continue with the daycare example, perhaps your child is mastering new movements in different games. You are less resentful of them wanting to be all up in your personal space come Friday night, and you can afford the annual family holiday you all love. Keep going until you've reached at least 20 positives. I promise there will be that many. Then notice if the negative emotional charge around your situation is still as great as it was before. If this still doesn't do the trick, get yourself a big old blanket and cuddle up with Brené Brown's TED Talks on vulnerability, or find yourself a mind-body therapist like a Killer Bee Inquiries practitioner who can help you collapse the shame we hold on to around our personal deficiencies. Mama, if guilt has been weighing on you heavier than a newborn nappy bag, you are not broken. It doesn't mean you're doing a bad job. It probably doesn't mean anything about you at all. Although our outside environment has a lot to answer for in leading us to this point, it is the work we do within ourselves that will bring about the most immediate changes in our experience of mothering. Each day we have a chance to unhook ourselves from the merry-go-round of mum guilt. As we free ourselves of our social conditioning, we come to know we are worthy simply because we exist, not because of how well we fit the perfect mother mold. The mothers around you will notice the change, how you laugh more easily, walk taller, and shine brighter. They may be suspicious at first, but soon they will want in. You can teach them what you know in your head and feel in your bones about what it is like to write your own script on being a good mum. They live it, they teach it to their friends, and the momentum builds. This is how it starts. Buckle up, my friend. The Motherhood Revolution has begun. I hope you enjoyed this episode of the podcast. Please remember to subscribe and leave a 5-star review and share with anyone you feel may benefit from this content. If you'd like to continue the conversation, join me on social media at Anna Cusack Postpartum and head to my website www.annacusack.com.au to check out the ways we can work together. Please use the contact form on the website to inquire about having me run workshops with your client groups or book me for corporate speaking or professional development presentations. See you next episode.